A desert ghost town poisoned by an unnatural body of water.
It looks like some kind of apocalyptic vision. Something happened here, and it wasn't that long ago.
A derelict settlement in Czechia with a mysterious past.
We're talking billions of dollars of environmental damage.
A notorious jungle compound that became infamous around the world.
It really is hell on earth.
And a Norwegian mountain fortress that saw one of World War II's most daring raids.
It was one of the most extraordinary operations of the war.
Decaying relics and ruins of lost worlds. They were forged through years of toil, but are now haunted by the past. Their secrets are waiting to be revealed. Perched high on a mountain 100 miles west of Oslo in Norway is a structure that could have helped change the course of history.
This place would become the subject of a major Hollywood blockbuster.
So you've got this imposing, huge building with these giant windows overlooking the valley. It's definitely built with purpose. What was it for?
You can see this is a large factory-type industrial installation. And I'm thinking the effort to have built this is enormous.
Its remote position and the barbed wire fences suggest that whatever was inside was of great value.
It's obviously under tight security, even today.
But it's the rubble in front which is an important part of the story. That is all that remains of a different structure that once dominated this mountain enclave.
What went on here that you've got one building that has lasted and will last, and one building that obviously hasn't?
In the surviving subterranean levels is a tangled mass of steel.
Inside, there are signs of immense destruction. Something happened here with great force.
The story of this great industrial complex dates back to the beginning of the 20th century. Men from an elite fighting force would later risk their lives attempting to destroy it. The surrounding terrain offers some clues about the purpose of the building.
There are clear connections between the landscape, and particularly the waterfall, and the building, because there are vast pipes coming off the mountain and into the building.
This is the Vemork hydroelectric power plant, which was built by Norsk Hydro in 1911. Gunhild Laras is an expert on the history of the facility.
This is the machine hall where the hydroelectric power was made. When it was finished, it was the biggest power plant in the world.
Vemork was built to produce fertilizer to help grow the crops that were needed to feed the world's rapidly increasing population.
One of the many challenges for scientists in the early 20th century was to find more fertilizer for food production. And for fertilizer, you need nitrogen.
But the chemical process involved in the extraction of nitrogen required an enormous amount of energy.
Well, one thing Norway has in abundance with mountains and rivers is hydropower.
So the waterfall will hit the turbines with high speed, and then it will turn around and you produce electricity in the generators.
Yet, in the basement of this now derelict place is a room full of specialized equipment that was built for a very different purpose.
This place started out producing something very good for human beings, but it turned out to have deadly potential.
So this whole manufacturing of the fertilizer, this fixating of the nitrogen, it ended up producing a byproduct. And this byproduct was heavy water.
Heavy water is very complex. It's very difficult to produce, and it's very expensive to produce.
Like ordinary water, heavy water contains two atoms, one hydrogen and one oxygen. But the hydrogen atom contains an extra neutron that increases its weight by 10%.
And this type of hydrogen is known as deuterium, or a heavy form of hydrogen.
On its own, it poses no danger. However, its unique atomic structure makes it a vital ingredient in the production of nuclear weapons. So, when Adolf Hitler plunged the world into war in 1939, it was no surprise that he wanted to get his hands on it.
Hitler's scientists needed the heavy water plant to slow down and sustain a nuclear reaction, which was a key stage in the development of an atomic weapon.
This site, it was the only place in the world where they produce heavy water at a commercial scale. So this was very important for the German nuclear program.
In 1940, German troops invaded neutral Norway and captured the plant. Within months, production of heavy water there had increased tenfold. The Allies knew that to have any hope of winning the war, they had to prevent the Germans from making and using an atomic weapon. The key man for the Allies was the Norwegian scientist Leif Tronstad.
Tronstad knew the site in minute detail because he had helped design it. He was able to explain to the British that simply dropping ordnance from the air onto the site would do nothing, as the heavy water plant was in the basement, and bombing it would simply destroy the buildings on top.
Tronstadt's plan was dangerous and fraught with risk. It was for specialist troops to infiltrate the facility and destroy its vital equipment from the inside. But Vemork was a natural fortress, and it was very heavily guarded.
This very mountainous terrain, you simply can't get up there by road. It's very easy to protect this plant in a conventional way because it is isolated up on the mountainside.
In October 1942, 4 Norwegian nationals were parachuted in as an advance team. The plan was for them to link up with British paratroopers who arrived the following month as part of Operation Freshman. Their mission was to break in and destroy Vemork.
The first attempt ended in complete disaster. On the 19th of November 1942, 2 gliders of British soldiers landed on the top of the mountain, but one crashed and the other was found by the Germans and the men shot.
Despite this very costly setback, the Allies had little option but to try again. And so, in February 1943, they launched Operation Gunnerside. It was to be one of the most dramatic and important military missions of World War II.
6 Norwegian commandos were parachuted in, and they were dressed in British uniforms, so that if captured, the Germans wouldn't take revenge on the local Norwegian population.
The plan was to rendezvous with the original Norwegian team, which had somehow managed to survive for 3 months in the sub-zero wilderness.
They'd landed safely, but far away from the target. This was a supplies and logistics disaster because they simply didn't have rations.
Incredibly, after a grueling 5-day trek through knee-deep snow, the 2 teams at last made contact.
Now they were united, they could finally attempt the seemingly impossible task of entering the site and halting Hitler's nuclear plan.
There was a discussion among the saboteurs about how they should enter this place. And one possibility was to cross the suspension bridge, but it was guarded.
After the failed Operation Freshman, the Germans had strengthened the power plant's defenses. Crossing the heavily guarded bridge was obviously now out of the question. The team would have to find another way in. Only 2 highly dangerous options remained. They were to approach through a heavily fortified mountain pass which was littered with landmines, or to scale a deep-sided ravine of some 500 feet.
So they decided that they were going down the gorge, and they had to climb their way down and up again on the other side, where there was a railway. And on the railway, there were no mines.
Once at the site, they knew how to enter the building and exactly where to place the explosive charges because Tronstadt had given them such detailed instructions.
In this room, the sabotage action took place. The leader of this operation placed the charges on the heavy water cells.
After somehow sneaking past the guards, the team made for the heavy water production room. They had to work fast, placing short 30-second fuses on the electrolysis chambers that produce the heavy water. And then they were gone. The operation was a total success. The explosions ripped through the plant, destroying at least 1,000 pounds of Hitler's heavy water.
It was one of the most extraordinary operations of the war.
Amid the chaos, in the aftermath of the explosions, the entire group managed to slip away. Incredibly, not a single life had been lost, and no shots had been fired by either side. The group somehow made its way back through the ravine before splitting into smaller groups and making good their escapes to neutral Sweden. Eventually, every single man found his way back to the Norwegian unit, which was stationed in Britain. Their story of daring is forever immortalized in the 1965 Kirk Douglas blockbuster, The Heroes of Telemark.
If the Vemork plant had not been destroyed, Hitler could have been able to go on to develop atomic weapons.
It's true that the Nazis were eventually able to resume the production of heavy water at Vemork, but by then it was all too late. Germany hadn't the capacity or resources to produce an atomic bomb, which could have turned the tide of the war in Hitler's favor. In later years, what remained of the heavy water plant was demolished. Today, the site is being turned into a museum, a lasting memorial to the daring and courageous men who did so much to help win the war against Nazi Germany.
The saboteurs are heroes. They are maybe one of the biggest heroes of Norway.
Just imagine if Operation Gunnerside hadn't been successful. The world could be a rather different place.
In the middle of the barren Californian desert, some 150 miles southeast of Los Angeles, is an unusual inland sea.
When you look at this body of water, it looks off. Something's a little bit wrong with it.
Dotted around the water's edge are crumbling remains from a long-forgotten past.
It looks like some kind of apocalyptic vision. There's all these signs of human settlement, but everything is broken down and decrepit.
Instead of being a vast living place, it's almost death-like.
Derelict buildings and rusting relics are all reminders of the community that once thrived around these waters.
You can see the remnants of a motorhome, broken down old motel. So something happened here, and it wasn't that long ago.
So, what was it that happened here? Are there clues to be found in the surrounding land?
As you look around, the land is alive. There's bubbling mud coming up from gases deep within the earth.
Is this a natural phenomenon? What changed? And what is going on with this body of water?
Only 40 years ago, this region was full of bustling towns built to accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. Today, only a small fraction of them are still here. John Karyotis arrived in the 1970s.
It was very nice because there were markets and gas stations and restaurants, and it was a big community that lots of people were a part of. To see it depressed like this hurts. And the people that are here are probably going to be here until the day they die.
In the 1960s, this was a booming holiday resort, which attracted more than 1 million visitors every single year. It was just a 2-hour drive from Los Angeles, and it soon became a favorite playground of Hollywood's rich and famous.
So back in its heyday, the Rat Pack was here, Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Streisand, a whole lot of other people. It's before Palm Springs was what it is now.
Bathers crammed onto the sun-soaked beaches, and anglers filled their nets with the plentiful fish that were found in the waters.
There were regattas, there were more boats out on that sea than you could shake a stick at. The fishing was wonderful.
It's hard to imagine those luxury times. The fact that all of these communities are down on their luck, it's not just one or two suffering from lack of investment, point to a much, much bigger problem. The thing that connects all of these sites together, the problem is the water.
These are the ghost towns of the Salton Sea, an accidental lake that transformed the fortunes of this dusty desert region for better and then for worse. But how did a giant lake appear from nowhere in the middle of one of the driest regions in the world? And why does it now resemble an apocalyptic wasteland?
In the early 1900s, everybody wanted to use the Colorado River to irrigate farms in the surrounding desert.
The Colorado begins high in the Rocky Mountains and winds some 1,500 miles to the Gulf of California. To irrigate the important agricultural area in the Golden State's Imperial Valley, engineers constructed a canal which diverted water away from the river. But trying to tame the mighty Colorado was no easy task.
Engineers like to be in control, but when you're up against a force of nature, you can never actually tell what's going to happen.
In 1905, after torrential rains, the swollen Colorado River broke its banks. The river changed course and began flowing west into what was then a dry desert valley. Every 24 hours, 6 billion cubic feet of water flooded into the valley, creating a lake that rose by 7 inches every day.
It took 2 years for the engineers to figure out how to stop the flow of water, and by that time, it had largely filled this vast inland basin.
The lake itself essentially then created all of the things around. Money started coming in with the tourism. People started wanting to tap into that.
They started building motels and beachfront facilities, and people started to drive out from Los Angeles to check out this brand new inland sea. They called it the Salton Riviera.
Spanning nearly 400 square miles, the Salton Sea became California's largest freshwater lake. As well as giving birth to a thriving tourism industry, the engineering disaster completely transformed once inhospitable land.
The water in the desert meant that the land became fertile. It became a huge agricultural area.
Farming is very important to the area. Imperial County is known as the breadbasket to California. If you want fruits and vegetables all the way through the Midwest, they very likely came from here in the Imperial County.
At first, it was great. You had this barren, dry desert, all of a sudden filled with fresh mountain water, and it was this lovely kind of oasis in this otherwise pretty brutal desert.
So what began as a catastrophe soon became known as the miracle in the desert. But the success of this man-made Californian lake was short-lived. And before long, the miracle had turned into something of a nightmare.
Well, here we are in the center of town. This used to be the bank, the building that we're in here right now. In its heyday, you could expect that there were traffic jams out here in the street, people crossing in the middle of the street, and not really caring who they stopped and what they did, because they were here for a good time.
Little did everybody know, but an ecological time bomb was ticking.
Looking at the beach today, You don't have to be a specialist to know that it doesn't look right. It doesn't look natural. There's something alien about the landscape.
Everything is covered with this fine layer of kind of a white, dusty powder.
The once pristine beaches now look very different indeed. John Karyotis' wife, Amari, witnessed at first hand the devastation that came to the region.
No, people think this is sand. This is millions of fishes, fish bones, vertebrae. There's barnacles in here. It looks really pretty, but it's just dead fish, millions and millions of dead fish.
You begin to start to think, is there a natural disaster?
Well, this is a very active part of the Earth geologically. It's very near to the San Andreas Fault and many other faults.
One of the stranger things that you find is this kind of area where there's all these mud pots bubbling up.
It's almost like an alien landscape. Could it be that something like this happening has suddenly changed the environment around and caused many of the problems?
Was this a natural disaster or something that was man-made? But the bubbling and boiling areas are the clues that tell us this is no ordinary body of water.
I mean, at first impression, you might assume some sort of natural disaster has caused the problems here, but when you delve in, something more sinister is going on. It's not a natural disaster, it's a man-made problem.
The only source of new water for the Salton Sea comes from the 500,000 acres of agricultural terrain that surround it. And there was the problem. The huge benefits that came as a result of industrial farming actually had a terrible cost.
Because it's the lowest place in the landscape, there's no in and out like a normal lake might have. So what goes into the system stays in the system.
It's constantly getting saltier and denser as the water evaporates. You see that in the Dead Sea in Israel. Here, the problem is compounded because what water is flowing in is flowing through these various irrigated farms. So it's highly polluted with pesticides and fertilizer.
And what we're left with in the lake is this chemical soup.
The fish can't breathe, and they die, and then they end up on the shore. We've had half a mile in of dead fish, and it was horrific. The smell was horrific. No one wanted to be on the beach.
Eventually, the tourists and visitors stopped coming, and the once thriving towns were abandoned. And there was even worse to come. Over the past 15 years, the water level has dropped by almost 8 feet, exposing 20,000 acres of lake bed.
In that region of the desert, there's almost no rainfall, so the Salton Sea started to dry up.
And it's now exposing this fine dust with lots of salt, but also lots of these poisonous pesticides and so on concentrated in it.
The winds pick up sand from the desert, and it will pick up the chemicals and transport them hundreds of miles across the rest of America. It's a huge risk to public health.
Beaches that were once packed with sunbathers are now lifeless, toxic sludges. It's heartbreaking for those that knew this place in its heyday.
It has a whole impact. We have the highest asthma rate because of this. There are people who are ill because of breathing this.
Behind every tourist town, there's a population of people whose home it is. That's where they bring up their children, that's where they live and they die. And for people here, it's very, very sad.
Today, the hotels and restaurants are abandoned, all just fading memories of a once golden age.
You used to think that this was going to be a place that was going to come back to the way it was in the 60s and 70s, and I'm sadly mistaken. It's not going to happen.
In French Guiana, on the northeast coast of South America, is a remote Amazon settlement with a brutal past.
Some of the buildings here look relatively pleasant. Colonial buildings with the traditional wooden shutters. But as you move farther into the site, you encounter a different type of building.
It's clear that people have been here before, and lots of them, and they've left their mark quite literally on the walls.
The more you look around, it becomes apparent it's tinged with suffering and sadness.
The walls feel like they're closing in. It's getting more and more unpleasant, and the dark history of this place is beginning to dawn on you.
There's no doubt that this place was once some kind of prison. And for one famous inmate, the story of his life here and of his daring eventual escape became an international bestseller.
But was it true? Was it really his story? Or was it embellished? Clearly, there's a lot here worth investigating.
The intriguing story behind these crumbling buildings began in 19th century France.
The French were facing an issue with their prisons. They were crowded and they were expensive.
And slavery is about to be abolished around the world in their colonies.
To solve the twin problems of rising crime and a shortage of workers to maintain France's foreign territories, Napoleon III came up with a radical solution.
The French began exploiting their colonial territories abroad by sending their very worst criminals there. This removed dangerous prisoners from France, took the strain off the French prison system, and gave the French colonialists a free workforce abroad.
Built in 1850, this penal colony on the Moroni River was the first stop for convicts sentenced to prison with hard labor in French Guiana.
It's no coincidence that this type of punishment was often used in some of the most inhospitable and remote territories in any given European's empire.
By 1946, some 70,000 convicts had been shipped across the Atlantic to South America. Yet it would be another 2 decades before this place became infamous around the world.
On the walls are names and signatures, and one of them, in particular, leads you to realize what an incredible story this place has to tell.
So there's a very famous inmate here, Papillon.
The man is a legend, the mysterious prisoner with the large butterfly tattooed on his chest.
In 1969, his account of his life here was published, and it became an international bestseller. 4 years later, Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman brought the story to an even wider audience in the movie Papillon. This is the notorious Saint Laurent de Moroni prison, part of a grim complex of penal colonies in French Guiana. Local guide Ronnie explains more.
The more tough and rough guys stay here. And you see here, Papillon cell. Henri Charrière, alias Papillon. He's just a cell. And on the floor here, you see right his name, Papillon.
Henri Charrière was just 27 years old when he was sent here in 1931. His story began here, but as we'll see, it was to end at a place with a reputation even more fearsome.
Henri Charrière was sentenced to life imprisonment with 10 years hard labor for a murder he claimed he never committed.
As well as the usual brutalities of hard labor, there was also a very hot and difficult tropical climate with all the diseases that it brings: malaria, dysentery, fever, typhus, even leprosy.
An astonishing 40% of new arrivals died within the first year. There were almost daily acts of violence between the prisoners. Here, only the strongest and the fittest survived.
If you're weak, they're gonna punish you. Maybe you don't eat, they take your food, they beat you, take your money, take everything of you.
The prisoners were regularly beaten by the prison guards. If any inmate dared to retaliate, the punishment was severe. They were put to death by guillotine. The executions were carried out here, in the open space between the 2 rows of barracks.
They don't see by the hair when the knife go down, shock. They say, "Let us die," and then they begin to sing. The whole place here sing a song for them friend.
It's no coincidence that these prisons had large graveyards attached to them. For most people sent there, it was going to be a one-way trip.
Part of the uproar about the prisons in French Guiana was that these places were never about rehabilitation. It was about using vulnerable people in society as slave labour.
It's hardly surprising that there were many attempts to escape. They were rarely successful.
The architecture of the prison is like prisons worldwide. But in this place, the environment was also a prison.
In the jungle, you've got spiders, poisonous snakes, venomous centipedes, flesh-eating ants. You think, oh, well, I'll escape the heat in the river. You don't want to do that either because it's full of piranhas and caiman.
Despite the overwhelming odds, Papillon refused to give up hope of escape. He made several attempts. They all failed.
And for those escapes, he was finally sent to Devil's Island, which was considered the most inescapable of all of the colonies.
Devil's Island was the most feared place in the French Guiana prison system. Situated 10 miles offshore, the bleak, rocky outcrop was surrounded by shark-infested waters. Being sent there was bad enough, but Papillon was also sentenced to 2 years solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement quarters have to be one of the worst aspects of the site. Imagine being shut in completely on your own, no ventilation, no window, nothing, just you alone with your thoughts.
Amazingly, after 13 years of imprisonment and 9 escape attempts, Papillon finally broke free from Devil's Island.
Using a bag of coconuts as a raft, Charrière escaped and eventually made it to Venezuela, where he started a business. He became a restaurateur and then wrote a book about his experiences.
But after all this time, the mystery still remains as to how much of it actually is true.
A French Justice Ministry report into the Devil's Island complex concluded that Charrière's story should be divided by at least 10 to get anywhere near the truth. Others insisted that the episodes in the book were imagined or embellished. Much later, another former prisoner came forward to claim that he, not Charrière, was actually Papillon.
There's some thought that his book is a mix of other people's stories as well as his own. Actually, when it comes down to it, the truth is this was a harsh environment.
Whatever the realities, the controversy surrounding Charrière's account continues to this day. He died from throat cancer in 1973, so the truth about him will probably never be known. But news of the barbaric conditions here did eventually seep back to France.
And once news about the inhumane conditions got out, the French conscience was stirred by these revelations, and the lease on life for these places was short indeed.
A century after it opened, the doors of the penal colony were finally closed, and the remaining prisoners were repatriated. Except for 300 of them who simply refused to leave.
They instead remained in French Guiana. It was the only life that they remembered and the only one that they could imagine.
Today, thankfully, the prisoners are gone, and these derelict buildings and empty cells are all that are left to remind us of the darker side of colonialism. "50 miles northeast of Prague, the capital of Czechia, a vast wilderness extends as far as the eye can see.
It's a spectacular area. It's rural, quiet. It feels like the ideal place for a day's hiking.
When you start to investigate further, you've also got settlements that hint that there's been populations that have lived in this area for rather a long time.
A short distance away, there are structures that appear to date from more recent times.
You can see that this area has been developed over a fairly long time. And there are different buildings from different eras here. There's something of a mix.
Any trace of the people who once walked these ghostly stairwells has long since vanished.
But strangest of all is a building with a very creepy air. There's a large bath, showers, and a contraption that's big enough to walk through.
Outside, there are bullet cases, pockmarked walls, and twisted metal. The mystery deepens.
It makes you wonder what is wrong with this place. People keep on coming, but then going. What is happening?
The intriguing structures are located in a region of Czechia that has a complex history. The reasons they were built are to be found during the post-war years.
When the Communist Party came to power in Czechoslovakia after World War II, the country effectively became a satellite state of the USSR.
Czechoslovakia was on the border with West Germany. That was the front line of the Cold War.
This sprawling site in Ralsko was once the biggest Soviet army base in Czechoslovakia. When it was built, only Red Army soldiers were allowed to enter the top-secret facility.
In modern warfare, you need large training areas, not just to base the troops, but you need large tracts of land where you can fire artillery.
Even today, access to all areas of the site is restricted. Retired local policeman Václav Bilicki worked nearby in the 1970s. His job was to tackle the hazardous materials that spilled out from within the base.
I came here in 1976. I was working for the police force, at the time called the National Security Corps, as a bomb disposal expert. Within this area, we had a blasting hole for destroying ammunition.
But why were the Soviets so desperate to conceal what they were doing inside? And what disaster lay in store? Throughout the 20th century, this was on the front line of a bitter European territorial dispute. During the early years, it was occupied for training purposes by the Austro-Hungarian military. Later, the Luftwaffe used it during the Second World War.
This part of Europe was home to thousands of ethnic Germans, and Hitler very much wanted to bring them within his concept of Greater Germany.
After the war, the Czechoslovakian government will then brutally expel the Germans and seize their land, seize their property.
The stage was now set for the Czechoslovak army to unleash a new wave of destructive power.
All the homes, schools, and churches, they used them for target practice. With heavy munitions, they flattened the lot.
So those little quirky houses built into the rock face, they were just cellars. The houses actually were above ground, and those houses were blown to smithereens.
This was just the beginning of the area's rapid transformation into a modern military zone. But as the years passed, the threat posed by the Soviet Union grew even stronger.
Until then, Czechoslovakia had been the only Warsaw Pact country not to host Soviet troops.
They were everywhere else, in Germany, Poland, Hungary, and Bulgaria, everywhere but here.
On August the 20th, 1968, amid a wave of anti-communist protests, all that changed.
The Soviets sent in 250,000 troops into Prague and the core cities of Czechoslovakia.
And the number doubled over the next couple of days.
After the Soviet invasion, there was a treaty signed, and that stated that 75,000 Soviet troops could be stationed in this region.
It's that invasion that explains the reasons for the buildings here.
These buildings were intended for the families of the pilots, officers of the Soviet Army.
At a time when both East and West were threatening each other with annihilation, the location of this place would have made it strategically vital in the event of all-out war.
Up to 20,000 Soviet troops were living there in a full military town with schools, shops, apartment buildings, workspaces.
The existing airfield was rapidly expanded, and bunker-like structures were built to conceal state-of-the-art attack aircraft. The Soviets were preparing for a new kind of war.
The MiG-23 was a big step forward. It was very capable, and it would have made a pretty good opponent.
Yet, much of the history here is still hidden in secrecy. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the true scale of the weapons stockpile started to become clear. And more alarming discoveries were being made all the time.
So with the military gone, you've now got a city-sized grassland absolutely strewn with live ammunition. How do you go about making a place like that safe again?
Over 130,000 pieces of unexploded ordnance were left dumped or crudely buried in the ground. Václav was part of the team with the hazardous job of clearing it all up.
This was probably the most dangerous piece of ammunition here. If it remained in this condition, and someone had found it and wasn't careful enough, it was quite a blast.
Inside one building is evidence that the Soviets may have been developing even more sinister weapons of war.
As you go in, you can see this weird-looking machine. And it's now thought that that machine is an autoclave. And they're used to decontaminate and sterilize equipment. Whatever they were up to with that equipment, it was serious business.
In all, 50 million cubic feet of soil was found to be polluted by dangerous contaminants.
When the Soviets left, it cost millions of dollars of environmental damage.
Despite this, the Soviets ignored all requests to help restore and clean up the mess they had left behind.
Although much of the land has been cleared, there remains always the danger of undiscovered munitions. So work still has to be done to make it 100% safe for the local people.
To this day, the Soviets have never revealed what took place behind closed doors here. So, until the Cold War era archives are fully opened, the site will continue to be shrouded in mystery. Now they are abandoned, crumbling ruins. Many remind us of dark times, but some were once beacons of hope and progress. Lasting testimonies to human imagination, enterprise, and spirit.